Hello guys, welcome to today's video. Let's just get right into it. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to see that there is a new map. This is the religion map. So we see that these guys over here have started their own religions. India has their own religion, like what we consider like Hindi. Then Caspia has their own religion, Kokistan has theirs, which is in Crimea, but also a lot of it is in there. Turkey has their own religion, Egypt. If it's like a different shade of the colour, then it's like a branch of it. So this is like, these two are the same religion, except a bit different. You see the Danish religion spreads all up there. Yeah, so we've got a different red religion there. No red religion in Somalia. I know this doesn't reflect the borders, but like French religion, whatever. So I just wanted to add this, because why not? Anyway, next up, if we go on the stability map, we see that Turkey is now in a new colour. Whatever. And they are orange. They're not red, which is like verge of civil war. But they're not yellow, where it's like around half. It's like still the majority don't like it. But a lot of people still do. And therefore, Turkey is orange. But besides those two, we are going to see the first alliance. And this is going to be between Turkey and Turkey and Greece, except I called that Turkey. That's Greece and Turkey, which in real life would never happen. And it's going to be represented by a circle. And along with this, red team's kind of forced into this. They're a puppet state. So, but on another note, we see that they finally. Okay, I'm gonna have to switch to my other brush first. I'm gonna switch to 20. They discover up to the Malawi lake. And they also start making their way to, is that the Malawi? No, that's the Malawi lake. That's just a different lake, right? But they get very close to the other lakes, as they've heard they're in that direction. Also, the year at the moment, I don't really know, but it's probably around 600 to 800. But you can decide what exact year it is or whatever. They also discover a few of these islands. They also discover a few of those islands and continue down the south, but they're not the only one, as we also see that these islands get discovered, along with a bit more here, down that coast, these islands. Also, there's a river here, I think, so follow that, whatever. We see that this is kind of what the borders look like. Nobody wants to go into the Sahara. Nobody's discovered any, they don't even know that exists yet. They know, the general shape. They know all of that, and they probably just think it goes, something Okay, I'm gonna need to go on a different layer. They probably just think it goes like that. Or that. Seeing as they see a kind of a curve here. So anyway, besides that, we see that the first defensive pact is made, which I'm also going to put on this layer. That's between the Red Arabian country and the Israeli country. And they basically made a pact because if you go on the religion map, they are the only Arab country which follows. They're the only Arab country which fully follows the same religion. These guys just follow a different one. If we Christianity, for example, I know different versions of that. Imagine this is all like Catholic, then like these would be like Protestant, you know, like Eastern Orthodox, Baptist, whatever. You know, whatever. But, you know, also around this time, we see the first creation of the gun. So I'm going to fix up these borders as I describe it. So, basically, Turkey, I don't know how you actually pronounce it, I'm just going to call it Turkey. Turkey is just, like, in a lab, they're experimenting with metals or something. Blah, 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 one thing leads to another, and they make the first infantry rifle. And they start making more of it. And they're, like, starting to get their soldiers up, but they don't want to let the world know. And, yeah, that's basically what happens. Okay. After that, we see that all of Ireland is discovered by England, which I'm going to be calling that, because they're not the UK. They're not Britain, they're England. So you see that they start to claim it, and France is kind of like, hey, the natives here, they probably want their own nation. You gave it to Scotland, why not these guys? And to that, England's like, yeah, we just want the land. And the French, you know, can't control them or anything, so it is what it is. And we see that Crimea does some of their own. Why am I still on this brush? So, some exploring gets done by Turkey. Oops. But we also see that Crimea expands off of this. And they kind of explore, like, up into modern-day Ukraine. And they do all of that exploring. And they like, you know, drop some borders. And in these borders they draw up for themselves. They just decide to take all of this land in, like, you know, they basically just take Ukrainian land. And, you know, Turkey is like, well, if they're going to expand, then I think we should get to expand, right? I mean, they can't just expand. We need to stick for status of being what I actually think is probably the biggest country. Actually, no, because they did have that civil war. So they just decided to, like, you know, claim modern-day Belarus and some Russian lands. Alright, so I made this like, rebel group a darker colour because it was kind of hard to know. You see that all of this Southeast Asian region, like, which I've called French Indochina in my notes, but it isn't that, it's Southeast Asia, because French Indochina didn't have Myanmar or Thailand. Which, I mean, they're not discovering much of Myanmar, but that's the point. And they go down to, like, the Malacca Strait or whatever. I don't know what it's called. They go down to Singapore. And they just carve up all this land. And this Thai team takes all of, like, down here in the Malaysian bits and whatnot. And they finally expand somewhere that isn't completely straight. Vietnam becomes, like, well, just French Indochina with minus the northern bits, because they get all of this Vietnam bit, all of Cambodia. Well, not all of Cambodia, I think that's probably Cambodia, but most of Cambodia, or all, and, like, Laos, bit of Thailand maybe. I don't know the borders. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of what happens. And the reason that, like, South China doesn't take more land is because, like, they've, like, they don't know it, but they have, like, all of this to explore. So obviously they don't know that, so they could, for whatever reason, not know, and it could be, like, well, it could look exactly like that. But still, like, quite a lot of room. Also, that being where the sea border is, isn't it? Then it's like the sea. Since they're not very up to the date with the world. Well, yeah, they know about this, but they probably just think, they don't know. It could go, not like that, whatever. But yeah, so they have a lot more land to take, so they don't really mind. And speaking of which, the Korean team, Northern China and Southern China, all make a charter. They just divide up the land of all the land I'm about to cover. Alright, so in these lands we see that, like, East China, Taiwan, all of these islands, most of Japan, just not Western Sakhalin, bit of Russia, whatever. But let's get to the charter. Alright, so I already drew the borders, also they're going to get some of these islands. Yeah, so I did that just because I drew them on the wrong layer, which automatically leaves North China with all of this land. But let me draw, like, the rest of the borders for them. So they get, like, this, all of that as well. And the only way that they come to peace to not get, like, some of this, which Korea wanted, they ended up giving away Seoul. I think that's what this island's called, but... Or is that the capital? Oh no, they give up this island. Yeah, it's called Fukuoka or something. And Seoul is the capital. We see that Korea gets all of this land, and for the remaining land, this is all formed into one, like, Sakhalin-based nation, in which they get the northern Japanese islands, Sakhalin, and this bit. So, yeah, that's all divided up. And for the ideological perspective on this, and the capital city and whatnot, we see that the capital city is here, and that they are a monarchy. And we see that with all these guys kind of making a charter, India is like, hey, I want to get over there. So they kind of follow this trail down, expand a bit outwards. They explore some of these islands, and eventually, with the help of China, they expand all the way like that. And yet again, there's a division. Seeing as India did most of the exploration, they convinced them to give them this amount of land, plus all of the islands they discovered. Seeing as the Thailand team barely actually did any discovering, they only get that amount of land. And the rest goes to southern China, as they did a lot of discovering as well. Seeing this expansion from South China, northern China gets jealous, so they expand, like, all the way out to there. And being, like, colonialist, warmongers, mad, whatever, they take all of the land. And with, like, West India not being able to jump in on this action, West India and Caspia both decide that they're going to go west. Caspia goes also a bit north, but, not too much. And they adventure up to this lake, in which they go down a bit, and that's kind of where Caspia stops. But West India also decides to continue exploring. They get all of that. East India decides to do a bit more. But apart from that, like, West India gets all the stuff they just explored. For their hard work, West India gets all of that. For their hard work, Caspia gets that, plus the northern bit. So they actually get all of that. But, this looks ugly, so... That's what they end up getting. These guys go back to Africa, eventually discovering Madagascar, some more of these islands, hell, all of these islands. And along with that, we see that Iberia continues down, and now they realise that it is not the shape that they thought it was. But they do explore a bit more, and they do two things. First up, they expand their, like, Moroccan kind of thing down to, like, Western Sahara, whatever. But they also do something extraordinary. They set up a colony. They just set up, like, a piece of land to connect out here, but they don't know that. They just kind of set up a piece of land because they don't want this bit. They don't really care. But they just kind of set up a colony there. and one just along the river. And people are like, what? You have land that isn't connected to your mainland, like, not at all. And Turkey is like, oh yeah, I've had colonies for ages. But they weren't considered colonies because they were close enough. I mean, like, this isn't too far from this, which isn't too far from this, which isn't too far from this. But Turkey is like, it's nothing too big, guys. But they're like, well, yeah, but this is much further away from this than this is from this. So, you know, pretty, like, big, substantial, whatever. And seeing this, we see that the Somalian team is just going to make it, you know, their business to set up a colony in Madagascar. And also explore a bit downwards. But yeah. That's what Somalia does. And we're going to see some invasion because I haven't had a war in a while. But anyway, before that happens, Kazakhstan's going to take this. And this is going to start war because Caspia's like, hey, I wanted that land, I was going to get that. And Caspia's like, no, Kazakhstan is like, yeah, but it's right above me. So Caspia's like, nah, that ain't going to work. So they start going along the Caspian territory. They take this new territory and start invading down. And they are much stronger than Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is quite weak. And they even take the, like, current capital. Which means they are they are one of the only countries, they are one of two countries that have been able to take a country's, like, capital. Because I think Turkey is the only one who has done it on 3 occasions. But they connect up, and they have the entire Caspian Sea. Seeing this, like, Turkey is like, oh yeah, count me in. In which, like, there's no opposition by Caspia. Caspia doesn't really care. But yeah, so Turkey expands up here, and they expand their influence along the Black Sea. Crimea. That's not the right colour. Crimea also expands along here. And eventually Kazakhstan is so weak that they surrender over to Caspia, in which, now let's look at this peace treaty, which are getting worse as now people really realise they can take advantage. This peace treaty was not nice on Kazakhstan, as their old capital is now just a, like, popular city in Caspia, and this is Kazakhstan. Not the best. And to make it even worse, they're a puppet to all 3 other countries. So they can just be called into battle whenever they want, and they also cannot get too strong of a military. You know. But we're going to see that Arabia has a conflict now. As Purple Arabia, I'm just going to be referring to them by the colours and then Arabia, because they're in Saudi Arabia, kind of, mostly. But Purple Arabia declares war on Green Arabia, because, you know, they're still declaring war at this point. They don't just invade. They declare war. And they take, okay, that's a bit much. You know, they take, like, all of this land from surprise. But, Orange Arabia is like, oh yes, this would be the perfect chance to sneak attack. And even though there was a treaty saying, don't go fighting each other by Israel, they're just like, hey, look, we can do this. Like, they're like, look, Israel, there's no point even fighting us over this. So why waste your time? But apparently Orange Arabia is going to take most of this. And these end up being the borders, but obviously that isn't kind of fair, so let's change it up. Orange team was also going to declare war on the red team, seeing as they're weaker, but defensive backed. So, can't really do that. But, let's move up here for the final thing. So, Caspia's kind of searching, like, these battle sites, and specifically where the, like, Turkey helped them fight, and where their dead soldiers are. And they discover the guns, and they're like, what the hell is this? So they bring it back in for testing. And Turkey doesn't know that they have found the guns. That'll be all for today. Hope you enjoyed it, and goodbye.